With the help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga Daf Chav Hey. We left off on Daf Chav Daled Amid Beis, right 7 lines before the bottom of the Amid, starting with the new Mishnah. The Perek began telling us the 11, according to some only 10, Chomers, Chumras, Milas, higher standards that Chazal gave to Kachim over Truma. And now our Mishnah is actually going to flip it, and we're going to learn that in some areas there's going to be a Chumrah concerning Truma more than Kach. And this has to do with the trustability, with the Ne'emanus that Chazal give to the Am Ha'aretz regarding her wine or oil throughout the year, when they tell you that the wine and the oil is starred and it could be used for kachim. Now, the truth be told, we already touched upon the concept of Eva on Daf Chav Beis. In other words, if there's going to be items, when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, that we will never accept from the Am Ha'aretz, because, truth be told, they were lax, they were not as knowledgeable. There is a certain possibility that the item is tummy, and you should know that biblically, whenever you have a doubt, you could follow and say you follow the majority. All of these stringencies are of rabbinic nature. So they knew that we're going to create what we call Eva and animosity. They're going to feel disenfranchised, if that's the right word. No, we had words that they might build their own Bama. They might build their own Beis HaMikdash, which we want to prevent from happening, and that fear is not shayach to Truma, because you have many Kohanim that were also Amaratzim. So if the Chavod won't accept their Truma, the Amaretz will. On top of that, we're going to add another nuance, as it's written in the Yerushalmi. There's something called Emas HaKodesh. Ema, like Yirah Shamayim, means reverence. That they understand the high standard of Kachim. They have a reverence and a respect for Kachim. And therefore, when it comes to Kachim, they were more careful. So when you put these two reasons together, as we'll see, Chazal felt that when it comes to their wine and their oil, two items that are used in the Beis HaMikdash, we trust them when they say that it's taught. When it comes to Truma, throughout the year, we don't trust them, but at least during the pressing season. Now there's separate pressing seasons, one for wine and one for oil. There was a takana that Chazal made that everyone's kalim has to be toivled right prior to, in the beginning of the pressing season. Even the chavedim toivled their kalim. So since everyone toivled their kalim again, so that heightened their awareness. Oh, we're taking this really serious. Also compounded with the fact that most of the trumas were given during the pressing season. And even though, as we just mentioned, that the Amaretz could give his truma always to the Amaretz, but that would be the majority of the people were Amaratzim, and that would mean that the Chavedim, Kohanim, would have a much smaller source for their truma. So again, the fact that everyone toivel the kalim, the fact that most of the trumas were given during the pressing season, there was also a leniency only during the pressing season that we can trust in Amaretz. So here you have a chomer of Truma over Kachim. By Kachim, they are always believed. By Truma, they're only believed during the pressing season. Now, there are many nuances. Even regarding Kachim, the wine and the oil that we are allowed to accept throughout the year was only if it was made in the territory known as Yehuda. Generally, many times, the Holy Land is divided into 3 Medinas. There's what we call the North, the Galil. There is what we call Transjordan, Evar HaYarden, and Yehuda. And the Gemara will explain why, even though we gave 2 reasons why we should trust Ha'aretz, why we trust Ha'aretz, but we were only allowed to accept the wine in the territory of Yehuda. Now, when it comes to the Amaratzim, Truma, pressing season, as the Gemara will clarify, that has nothing to do with Yehuda. At least during the pressing season, we are allowed to accept their wine and oil anywhere. Now, we're going to touch quickly upon the rabbinic decree known as Tumas Eretz Ha'amim, being that the people that are not living in Israel were not that careful to properly make burials and to mark the Beis HaChaim, and there were times that certain areas that were used for cemeteries were later introduced to being fields, and even according to Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, that Goyim don't give off Tumas oil, but there was a fear that the field was plowed over, the Beis HaChaim was plowed over, and the corpse of a Goy is metama l'kula alma, like a corpse of a Yid, and maybe there's a fragment of a bone on top of the ground, Then not only that, Chazal added that not only is the gush eretz ha'amim tamei, but even avir eretz ha'amim is matamei. Even if you don't touch the ground, because if the issue was only you might touch a fragment of a bone, you can argue what happens if you are transported, above the ground. Someone put you on this sedan chair and carried you through. You never. But if there is a fear that there might actually be a grave, and then you're going over it, I know that now we're going into a Yidden is buried, a Goy is buried. Bottom line is they were later misaken that even the Avir Eretz Ha'amin is Matame. We'll see how this relates to our Mishnah. We're going to touch upon the sugya of Oyhel Zaruk, which means a moving oil. Is a moving oil something that can interpose between you and the Tumah? B'Hashgacha Pratzos, we are learning this towards the end of Adar Rishon. Today's already Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, Tavshan Pei Beis. We're learning now Rambam, Hilchos Tumas Meis. And one of the foundational rules of oil is that what interrupts the Tumah from going further up, only something that it itself is not Tamei. So when it comes to a building which is connected to the ground, that's great. So if there's a Tumah on level 1, as long as you don't have any halachic openings between level 1 and level above it is not tummy. That's because the ceiling here is connected to the building, which is connected to the ground, which is not makabel tumah. When you have an item that is makabel tumah, just to be aware of that, then it's not choitzeitz mipnei hatuma. There's another concept called a moving oil, even if it's not makabel tumah, according to some opinions, is not going to be choitzes mipnei hatuma. We're gonna touch upon the Shas topic of Breda, retroactive clarification. We're gonna learn an opinion that holds that rabbinically it's prohibited to sell food in the Holy Land to a Am Ha'aretz, because the Am Ha'aretz might make it tamei. And so what? We keep on mentioning that really biblically there is no issue with chulin becoming tamei. There are some who hold that the chachamim made a takana that in Eretz Yisrael you're not allowed to be matame even chulin. Based on that, you cannot sell food that's tarred to a Am Ha'aretz and many other dinim. Again, we are in the heart of the sugya of Tumah and Tara. It's sadly coming soon to an end. This is already the third to last daf, so let's savor every moment. Chevra daf chaf dalad amid beis, starting with the Mishnah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'al kol yom. Zok the Mishnah that, like we mentioned, yes, there are 11, perhaps 10 choymers ba'kodesh over Truma. Now we're going to make a 180. You should know that there is a chumrah concerning Truma more than Kachin. And why does that? That in the territory of Yehuda, guys, let's leave this nuance for the Gemara, why only Yehuda, but in the territory of Yehuda, the Amaratzim are ne'emanim, they are believed when they say that their wine or their oil that is going to be used in the Avodah, sacrificial, Yain and Shemen, not Stam Yain and Shemen. If they say it started, we believe them. When do we believe them? Any day, not only certain seasons. Kol Yemai Sashana. However, when it comes to Truma, I'm saying it by heart, they don't have this Ne'emanus. Sometimes they have Ne'emanus. What is? Ubeshas Hagita is Vahabadim during the wine pressing season, during the olive pressing season, that's the Badim. Then the Amaratzim are believed even regarding the Tahara of their Truma, which means a Kohen Chaver could accept Truma from them. We spoke out on the intro, again, the double reasons for both. Just want to add a detail that when you read the Mishnah, it's not clear whether this B'shas Hagitois V'abadam Afala Truma is only in Yehuda, but it will become clarified in the Gemara. This is not related to Yehuda. Again, we're going to leave Yehuda for the Gemara. Now, something has to be mentioned. Rashi and Tosfos backs up Rashi with many more details. Not for sacrificial avodah, not for the Beis Hamikdash, they're not believed. Which means that when the Am Ha'aretz makes wine or oil, the Rabbanan said that it's tamei. Mit Rabbanan, tumas amaratzim. They're tamei, their kelim are tamei, their food is presumed to be tamei. So what? When they're magdashit, the tumah just goes away. How does that work? That's a problem. And therefore Rashi, I'm going to read Tosfos because he backs up Rashi and he just gives more words. The last Tosfos in the Amid, and Daf Chav Dalad in the bottom, says, when are they believed? Only when im higdishu lamizbeach b'shas habatzim. In other words, while they're pressing it, guys, don't forget that grapes, right prior to pressing grapes and olives, they cannot become tamei because they're not even wetted. And I'll tell you more than that, if they're not fully gathered, even if some of their own liquid oozed out of it by itself, and wine and oil are one of the 7 liquids that are machshir, oichlin to be mekabel tuma, but there has to be, like we said, kiyitain, kiyutan, there has to be at least the consent of the owners. When everything is gathered and it's ready to be pressed, the owners don't mind if some of the liquids oozed out on their own. They need the liquid anyway, they're going to squeeze it out anyway, but prior to fully gathering it, any liquid that oozes out is a loss. You don't want to lose it. It's not yet in the final vat. So just to know that prior to the pressing, even though the ha'aretz is presumed to be tamei, he is unable to be matama the wine and the oil. When does it begin? While he's about to begin the process. So says Rashi and Tosfos, our Mishnah is speaking about a scenario that prior to that, right prior to that, he declared the wine and the oil mugdash. It was never chulin. Let's read it inside. No, that's why he's more careful, and that's why if something is already tamei, even though the ha'aretz is going to be trusted when he says, guys, I know how I made this, I know it was not tamei, the kalim were not tamei, I was not tamei, I want to be magdashit. You can argue the reasons that we gave should apply. There'll be eva if you don't accept it, and there's emes hakodesh. But if it was already chulin and tamei, you can't remove the tumah. Let's read. I'm going to read the word. Then even call Yemai Sashanach. I'm reading Tosfos Nemana B'Shmira. For Amar Rav Chanan, the Chen Yitachan Lefarish. Rashi is good. It has to be that way because the Bishel Beloy Higdishu B'Shas Habatzir. If we're speaking about ha'aretz, who's being magdashit, but already after it was made, it's already a finished product. In other words, prior to him being magdashit, it was chulin, and chulin by default. V'nitma b'tumas ha'aretz. So v'chi kache, just because he's mekadosh right now, might have it. I'm just reading inside the emendation in the side. In other words, how pakale tuma minei? How will tuma go away from it? Tuma, once something is tamei, it cannot be declared not tamei. So this is a big limitation, but it has to be that way. Forever. Once something is tamei, the only food or liquid, like we mentioned, that can become tied is water. And it's water, you put water in a cup, and you fill the water until the top, and you put the cup down straight into a mikvah, hashaka again, and now the waters of the mikvah touches the waters that are by the rim. They kiss, and that's as if the waters in the cup are bottled in the waters of the mikvah, and then you pick it up and you're good. And that's only for water, correct? So food and liquid here, wine and oil, once it's tamei, can never become tar. Now there are many details. Truma that's tamei midoraisa has to be burnt, destroyed. Kachim that's tamei midoraisa has to be destroyed. Kachim that's tamei midorabanan you may not destroy, because biblically it's tar. You can't disrespect it. So you have to wait until it becomes tamei. Truma that's tamei, same thing. Could be, even biblically, could be, you can have hana from it. So oil that's given to a kohen, if it's tamei, he can use it to fuel his candles. But he can't consume it, he can't eat it. But the same thing, if truma is only tamei midrabanan, edible truma may not be used for fuel. Okay, come back over here. So that's number one. Now, nuances in this detail of truma. Says the Mishnah that Avru Hagitois Vahabadim, the season went by. Imagine if the ha'aretz would have given it to a kohen during the pressing season, the kohen chaver can receive it. Now it's not the season. But now v'hiviu lo chavi shel yain v'shel truma. So what do you say? Lo yikablenu mimenu. You may not receive it from him. But you know what you could do? If the ha'aretz takes it back to the ha'aretz's house, and he brings it to you during the next pressing season, and you recognize that this was made in the prior pressing season, doesn't matter, you can accept it. Aval manicho lagas abo. Guys, why? Because midoiraisa b'chlal there's no tumah. It's a chashash. On top of that, like we mentioned, when it comes to truma, Number one, everyone is metired the kalim during the pressing season. They're already in barrels. It's covered. It cannot get tummied again. You're not going to say he opened it up and he touched it. The Chazal said during the pressing season you can take it and not during the non-pressing season. But as long as you take it during the pressing season, it doesn't matter if it was made a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, it was always made during the pressing season. That is when it was casked. That is when it was bottled. Now, the im amaloi, another leniency, this is during the rest of the year. If a kohen has a barrel of wine and he wants to give it to a kohen, not during the thank you. Amaretz has a barrel of wine and he's giving it to a kohen chaver, not during the pressing season, but he tells him, Hifrashti l'toicher revi'is kodesh. Let's say that the person, the farmer, right, he's mechuyev to give, let's say, a gallon for truma. That's his 2%. There is a barrel that's larger than a gallon. And he tells the recipient kohen, listen, I owe truma X amount. The barrel has a little bit more, even only a little bit more. Of course, if it has a lot more. And that little bit more, I already consecrated for the Beis HaMikdash. I'm not going to give it, you're going to give it. In other words, there is a little bit of kodesh wine already in the barrel. What did we learn in the Mishnah? That when it comes to kachim, because of Eva, because of Amos HaKodesh, throughout the whole year, I know Yehuda. This is Yehuda. He's believed. So since there is nemanus regarding that even only the revi'is, a little bit, the whole barrel is also considered to be tar, and the kohen can use it for his truma. Because the little amount. Now, 1 second. You have to know so many details that will speak out some out. There's so many pratim here. Like, how does it work? Like, what do you mean there's a mixture of truma and kodesh? Is no problem. We subscribe to the principle known as breira. Breira means retroactive clarification. A kohen is allowed to accept a barrel that the donor tells him, some of it is truma, some of it is kodesh. The kohen separates any part of it in the amount of the kachim. And we say that from the outset, that was the amount of kachim. That works. It's not meduma. You don't have a problem of a mixture here.
For liquids.
In this case, it's liquids.
Solids as well.
Yeah, let's not get into that right now. We're not talking about a mixture of chulin and truma. We're speaking about kachim and truma. Now, another din, says the Mishnah, final din, by the end of the line, Neman, again, the Amaretz is believed. I'm sorry. Neman, Nakuda, Slicha. He's believed because of the Kodesh. It's called Migu, that there's Nemanus on the Kodesh. You believe him for the rest of the barrel. Next, the final din. Yayin, Kade Yayin, jugs of wine, the Kade Shemen, jugs of oil, Daf Chafei, Hamidu Ma'ois that are intermixed. Now here there's a very unique intermixture. Here, we're speaking about a barrel that has in it Chulin and Truma and Kodesh. Chulin and Truma and Kodesh. Now what do I mean by en Kodesh? By en Kodesh means that he said that a certain amount of what's in the barrel will be set aside for kachim. Not now. Not like in the case before that he already said, the donor says, I'm only mechuyev to give, let's say 2%. That's beinanis. And this barrel has a little bit more. So the little bit more is kodesh. That's the previous case. We don't know where it is, but it's already kodesh. Here, there's a barrel. Some of it is chulin, some of it is truma, and some of it, the owner says, I will separate for kachim. Not yet. And here, this final clause of the Mishnah is not focusing on the content, on the wine or on the oil. We're focusing on the kalim. So the question is, can we say that the kalim are tahar? Now, when it comes to the kalim that only has truma, wine or oil, what did we learn before? When do we believe the Amaretz? Obviously, the Mishnah was not only speaking about the content, it's also about the kalim. During the pressing season, truth be told, that already 70 days prior to the pressing season was when everyone started to be matayer the kalim. Nevertheless, which is one of the two reasons why, first of all, most of the trumas are given during the wine pressing season, during the oil pressing season, so they wanted to allow chaverim to accept truma. Number two, like we said, everyone is matayer the kalim, but taras ha-kalim happened already 70 days prior and closer. When it comes to the wine and the oil, if there's no kachim involved, we don't believe them 70 days before. It's only during the pressing season itself. But over here, we're not speaking about the wine and the oil, we're speaking about the utensils, on top of the fact that we're speaking about utensils that has in them some product that's designated to be given later as kachim. So here we can trust that the kalim are tar from 70 days up until the pressing season, and of course during the pressing season. Let's read it inside. Nemanim aleim, not only bishas hagitois vahabadim, that the kalim shleimim, not the content, that the kalim are tar, and even before for 70 days.
Where did this number 70 come from?
Because that is from when people started to be metired the kalim for the pressing season. No, it's the kalim that are used in the pressing season are not used every single day. It's only used during that season. Chazal made a takana that during the pressing season, everyone has to be metired the kalim, even chavedim. That's the way they made the amaratzim not feel, you have to do something that others don't. Everyone has to do it. Not everyone has time a day before, when everyone is bringing all of the kalim to the mikvahs, there's going to be a rush. So people began de facto doing it 70 days before.
These are earthenware?
These are not earthenware kalim. Earthenware kalim can never be tarred through the mikvah. These are all of the kalim that are used for pressing that are not earthenware. Shkoyach for saying that.
So only by mixture you say that they're in the morning, but for Truma Alliance you won't say that.
Truma Aleim we don't say. The mixture here, another thing. If there would be kachim in it already designated, we would believe them the whole year. Here, the owner did not say that a revius is kodesh, and then bereda. He didn't say that. He says that there's going to be leftover, and that leftover I want for it to be set aside for kachim. So because of that, there is a little bit more nemanus, not the whole year, not only during the shas agitois va'abadim from 70 days earlier, and we're speaking about not only the content but also the kelim.
But if he's saying it's the whatever's left over is going to become hektish, wouldn't we have the same namanas that he was careful about the kli and the rest of the liquid?
No. That's the point of the Mishnah. That when he declares it kodesh, like we learned in the Tosfos, was when I'm saying prior to pressing it, what I am producing today is for the Beis Hamikdash. Then emes hakodesh. Here there's less emes hakodesh because right now it's not kodesh. I know that there's going to be enough for this, there's going to be enough for that, and some of it. It's like when people go to work today. I'm going to give tzedakah versus having a separate bank account and putting the tzedakah money in there. It's a whole different thing. Okay, says the Gemara. Now here the Gemara is going to focus, why only be Yehuda? Be Yehuda inu bagol doesn't make sense. Emas hakodesh, you have Eva. What difference does it make? My Tama, Amar Reish Lakish, this is huge. The fact is, whether the Kutim who converted because they were from fear of the lions, whether it is considered a proper conversion or not, is not negeya to our sugya. What's negeya to our sugya is that geographically, during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, if you were to go from the Golol to the Beis Hamikdash, if you were to go, you would have to travel through land that was inhabited by the Kutim, who were not careful when it came to Tumas Meis. And the same reasons, like we spoke on in the intro, why Chazal at a certain point declared that anyone who simply walks into outside of Israel, Eretz Ha'amim, rabbinically, you are Tamei, but Tumas Meis, because maybe you touched a fragment of a bone. Then they noch added, even if you're going to go into an oil, they said, it's not going to be good. They were matama you. Okay? Avid Eretz Ha'amim is matama. That same Tuma existed in certain locations in Eretz Yisrael. And going from the Golol to Yehuda, there wasn't a path in which you wouldn't have to go through their territory. So basically what the Gemara is saying, this is not about the Amaretz producing it. This is really about anyone producing it. In other words, any wine or oil that's produced in the Golol was not, you can't bring it into the Holy Land. And Tosfos asks about what we learn in Masechtas Menachos, where the oil came from. This is a big statement. Our Gemara is saying, not because of the Hamaretz, because it's going to go through a territory that rabbinically will make it impure. I Why didn't you put it in oil? V'nesav b'sheda teva migdal. Let me just give one detail of all these dinim of oil. You see, my friends, we mentioned in the intro, again, we're learning now in the Rambam, that an item that itself becomes tamei cannot be mahil, cannot stop the tumah from going. But any large utensil doesn't become tamei. And sheda, teva, and migdal are considered the large kalim that are not mekabel tumah. So they theoretically could create an oil. Says the Gemara, our Mishnah must follow Rebbe. What does Rebbe hold? That oil zaruk, that a moving oil, is not halachically called an oil. And if an oil zaruk is not called an oil, like that's the whole topic. If you are in an airplane and you're flying over a cemetery, and you're a kohen, you know it's flying over a cemetery, you might have a problem. I say, why would I have a problem? I'm in a very large container. I know that it's metal, but it's because of the size, it's not mekabel tumah. You can argue maybe it's called an oil zaruk. If it's called an oil zaruk, that's the whole topic. There's a tshuva from Rav Moshe about this. Rav Moshe is very mekel and very machmer. Rav Moshe is machmer not because it's an oil zaruk. Rav Moshe had another opinion that even if the mace is under the airplane and there's a floor separating, he felt it's not choitzitz on the airplane. Let's not get into that whole topic because of time, but it's fascinating. So we paskin like Rebbe, the Tanya hanichnas leiratzu amim. So lekula alma, at a certain point, if you walk on the ground of any place in Chutz La'aretz, that person is tamei tumas meis chevre midrabanan. They have to go through the 7 days and and third day and the seventh day. Even if you don't touch the ground, you're going into this type of carriage, trunk, and closet. Shida Teva Migdal. Rebbe is still metame you. It's called Avir Eretz Ho'amim. But Rabbi Yehuda is metayr. But we still have a problem. What's the problem? We're learning this in Rambam. Okay, even though you can't use an oil to interpose, why don't you use the classical summit puzzle? This is a pasuk in Parshas Chukas. If you have an earthenware keli never becomes tummy from its outside. It can only become tamei if the tumah went into inside of it. And therefore the Torah writes that if it's properly sealed, however you interpret properly sealed, today it's going to be a cap on top of a bottle, that everything in it is protected from tumah. The keli itself cannot become tamei because earthenware keli cannot become tamei from the outside. So why can you not transport wine and oil for the Beis HaMikdash in a klei cheres that's properly sealed? V'laisua, or v'laisu b'klei cheres hamuk of tzamid pasel. So Gehevra Amar Rabbi Eliezer, that shoinen means this Rabbi Eliezer is a lochayda, is an amoira. Saying but gelent and abraisa, we have already from the Tanoim that know that ein hakodesh nitzel b'tzamid pasel. Wow. So we learned in last Perek 11 milas. Now you got yourself a 12. Or if it's 10, now you have 11. That tzamid pasel midrabanan doesn't protect. It doesn't protect. Did we not learn in a Braisa that only ein chatos nitzelis mitzamed pasel? The chatos, the mei chatos, which is the most susceptible, that is not protected. Does that not imply my love kodesh is protected? So the Gemara says, no, that's not the right inference. Make an inference, but make another inference. That what the Braisa means to say is, when do we say this rabbinic chumrah, that if mei chatas, which is the waters with the ashes, even though it's sealed inside a klei cheres, it's not protected from tumah if it's connected to a mace, if it's an oil, or if it's an eretz ha'amim, that's only if it's the waters already mixed with the ashes. But if you have the waters prior to it being mixed with the ashes, hamayim she'ein b'kadoshim, then yes, nitzayla b'tzamid pasel. But it doesn't speak b'chlal about kachim, and we are going to insist that kachim shears this additional maila, that by kachim you're not protected. Now we got the final problem. You know what the final problem is? From time immemorial, Yidden, we all believe that Mashiach is coming, but there are things that we do to concretize our emunah. Now I know that many people instinctively say, you know what, I'm going to take money and say this is for the Beis HaMikdash, or I'm going to be magdish an animal. If you remember, that was the end of Masechta Shkolim. That's something we're not allowed to do, because if God forbid Mashiach is not built now, then you're going to keep it in your house, and someone inadvertently can do me'ilah. But you know what people used to do? Says the Gemara v'ha'amar ula, that chevraya, Ula was, they were speaking about, 200 years after the Churban Abayis and the beginning of the times of the Amoraim. He says that our Chevra midakon bigalila, we would prepare bitahara, wine and oil, that when Mashiach is going to come, we're going to have what to offer in the Beis HaMikdash. Temple Institute. Now, they were not Magdish anything, but they're preparing items, so when Mashiach comes, it's ready. They would prepare wine and oil. Question is, they also, which Chevra did it? Even the ones that lived in the Golol. We already know from the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, the Mishnais, the Tanoim, the whole Golol. We know today that Ashbi, they all, because of Roman persecution, many Yidden who lived in Yehuda, they moved up to the north of Israel. So how, you're telling me right now that since the Kutim lived and there is no way out, you're going to have to go over their territory, so how did they prepare it? The Mashiach is going to come. It's going to become Tameg when you bring it to the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you the answer. They never actually brought it near the Beis HaMikdash, near Yehuda. They kept it in their homes. And Manichin. See, Eliyahu Navi is not going to make up new halachas. But Eliyahu Navi has a certain level of Ruach HaKodesh that we don't. So no one is saying that the Kutim buried or there was Mesim on every single inch of the land. We don't know where there might be a problem. Because we don't know, Chachamim said, it's all Tameh. If you have Eliyahu Navi, it's like the Arizal, he went around and he says, here there's a cave, here there's not. And he told you who's buried where. So Eliyahu Navi is going to find a path where no one was ever buried, and we're going to go on that road. He's going to be Megale, where is there no Tumah? Gavaldik.
He's not being retired.
He's not being metired. He's not making up an halacha. That's the emphasis. That's not Toidim and Hashemayim, but he's being megale. It's like one of the things that either the prophet is going to do, right, connected to Mashiach. He's going to tell everyone which shevet they belong to. It's not kol paskening edin. They know they'll be moirach v'doin. They'll shmek. Mashiach will smell, and he'll know beruach kachoy. You're Reuven, you're Shimon. He'll know here there's Tumah, here there's not. Go a little bit to the right. It's like, the Lahavdil, you have a minefield. So with the right kalim, you can walk through it because you're not going to walk on top of the mine. GPS.
Wasn't there a possibility of taking it by boat? From Haifa all the way down to Jaffa? Circumventing the...
So if I'm not mistaken, so Nasanal is pointing out good, why can't you take it via the Mediterranean? If I'm not mistaken, that once they were Misakin, that Gush Eretz Amim and Avir Eretz Amim is Tamei, it goes even over the water, even though no one is buried there.
No, but didn't yesterday about not taking it on a boat?
That's something else. That's Mechatos. That's not Kachim. That's Mechatos. Okay, let's go weiter. Tosfos asks, why didn't we learn this Maila yesterday in last Perek? We learned a big chumrah that ain't summit pasal nitzel should be mentioned. Okay, says the Gemara weiter. It says in our Mishnah, "Ubishas hagitois nemanam afalat truma." Says the Gemara, 1 second, V'reminu, I got a contradiction. Now we're quoting a Mishnah from Taharois. It says in the Mishnah, Hagoymer Zeisov, when a person is about to finish gathering all of their olives, like we mentioned a few moments ago, like this, olives, any product prior to becoming wet is not muksher. Olives and grapes, the presumption is that even though water didn't fall on it, but liquid oozes out on its own. One of the 7 liquids is yayin, one of the 7 liquids is oil. On the other hand, prior to the owner gathering all of that product, they don't want any of it to ooze out. So the Mishnah says that Hagoymer Zeisav means right prior to you finishing to gather it all, leave 1 box and give that to an ani that's a kohen. In other words, you're telling the Amaretz, there's no Eva because he can give it to a Amaretz. But sometimes there's a chaver, and the chaver needs money, and the chaver kohen won't accept anything from an Amaretz. So the Mishnah says, listen, do it like this, because since it wasn't fully gathered, even though the Amaretz is tamei, he cannot be metamei the olives or the grapes because they were not halachically yet mukhshard. Now, what do we see from over here? The Mishnah L'choira, it was speaking about pressing season, right? When do you gather all of your olives to press them? During pressing season. What did our Mishnah say? During pressing season, the Amaretz, there's no tum on the Amaretz. Why do you have to do this? Let them gather it all. It's during the pressing season. So the Gemara gives two answers. Amar Rav Nachman, answer number one, it must be that our Mishnah is speaking about B'charfei, that means the olives or the grapes that are ripe relatively earlier, or at least on time. They are gathered during the pressing season. And then there's no issue. You don't have to tell them, you don't have to find this loophole prior to you gathering it all, already separate the Truma. However, the Mishnah that we quoted in Taharis is speaking about Ba'afle. Ba'afle means that there are certain olives or grapes that they only became matured already after the pressing season. After even though you will press it then, but it's after the season. After the season, there's no heter. Then we have to presume we take that their oil and wine is tamei. So here the Mishnah Taharis, it gives us a eitzah how an ani chaver kohen can interact with the Amoritz without insulting him, but giving that eitzah, just don't gather it all and then separate it.
Even a fruit that's not, I think the olive that's
olive, a fruit that's not made for pressing, for sure is not muksher. Not muksher. Even that which is being gathered for pressing, if you didn't gather everything that you're going to press now, even though it's oozing out, we don't say the owner wants it because it's going to be oozed out anyway. No, he wants to first gather it. Now, Amalei Rav Ado bar Ahava, Kigoin Mai, what types of olives, right, Zaysav, are considered aflei? So he answered him, Kigoin shel beis avicha, like the ones you have. There's a lot of discussion over here. What exactly was the back and forth? But he just gave him an example of certain people who had fields that what is baby boomer or late boomers? They're late. Answer number two, Rabbi Yosef Amar. Now Rabbi Yosef understood, not the way we said the maskana, that when the Mishnah said Masha'en kein betruma, it's not related to Yehuda. He understood that just like the leniency for kachim, that they always have namanus, is only in Yehuda. When it comes to the truma, wine and oil, that we trust them when b'shas hagitois, he understood that's also only in Yehuda. Now that Pasha won't make sense. I'll tell you why it won't make sense. Because they're not taking it to the Beis HaMikdash for you to say it's going over the land of the Kutim. But that's the way he understood the Mishnah. Based on that understanding, that's the answer. No, it's our Mishnah was only speaking about the Yehuda. The Mishnah in Taharis is Bigalila Shanu. And again, Bigalila, they're not even Neman during Shas Hagitois, which is not correct. So Amma Esvei Abaya against Rabbi Yosef, it says in Abraisa that Ever Hayarden v'Hagolel Befedish, they are like Yehuda, not for kachim, but yes for truma, meaning nemanim alayayin b'shasayayin v'alashem b'shash for truma. Alama, you have to be careful. Only during the season for that product. Another nuance. Avaloi alayayin b'shas hashemen v'loi alashemen b'shas hayayin. It has to be the season of that product, but the season of that product, there is nemanus. When we read the Mishnah, we read it correctly. The limitation of Yehuda only goes to kachim, doesn't go to truma. So his answer is refuted, right? 3 lines, the first wide line on bottom of the Amid, Ella, Mechaverta, Kiddushanin, and Meikara. It must be that the Mishnah in Taharis was speaking about olives or grapes, that they were only mature after the pressing season. And that's why you have to figure out another way of having a ani, koyin, chaver, be makabel, that without it having any level of tumah. Says the Mishnah, quoting the Gemara, referring back to the Mishnah, and even though he pressed it during the pressing season, but he didn't give it to the kohen during the pressing season, he gave it to the kohen later. And then the Mishnah said, hold on, it's not the end of the world, because as long as the Am Ha'aretz producer, fabricant, holds on to it, he can give it to the chaver during the next pressing season. This is not because even if you recognize it's written the year on the barrel, doesn't matter. The question is, so I want to ask you a question. Once you're telling me that it's not a Isser Chefze, the wine is not the Tamei, you can't take it. You can take this wine next pressing season. What happens if he gives it to a kohen after the pressing season and the kohen accepted it? He's not going to drink it. It's in the kohen's house. Can he keep it until the next pressing season? So bo minei merab sheishes avar vekibla, if the kohen chaver did receive it, ma'u shianichenu legasaba. It's clearly no one is suggesting that since the kohen took it, he can consume it now. Don't consume it now. But just like the Mishnah allows for it to stay in the house of the Am Ha'aretz until next pressing season, so why can't it stay in the house of the chaver? The reason the other side is that since now midrabanan we consider it tamei, if something is in my house, I might end up consuming it. That will be the reason. So amalei tinisua, we have that answer in the Mishnah. Daf chav chei amid beis. What's the answer? Chaver va'am haaretz chaver. These sugis are so good. So let's go. Let me give you a little bit intro. There's many pieces of info you have to chop over here. You have a yid that's an am haaretz halachically, and he has wheat. Let's just speak about wheat. And he passes away. He leaves two sons. One son is a chaver, one son is an am haaretz. Now, wheat is a great example. After you harvested the wheat, if it never became wet halachically, then even if a source of tumah touched it, it won't become tummy. Which means, even though the owner, the father, and now that the father passed away, one of the sons is an am haaretz, owns all of the wheat or part all of the wheat, just don't know. If you know that it wasn't muksher, there's no issue. What happens if the son, the chaver, knows some of the wheat I know was muksher? No one knows there's tumah, but was muksher. Some of the wheat was not muksher. Now, midrabanan, the wheat that was muksher will de facto become tummy. The other wheat is not tummy because it wasn't muksher. So the question is, can the son, the chaver, when they divide the inheritance, tell his brother, listen, we're being honest, you don't have that standard of a chaver. They didn't hide this. Like today, glat, not glat, chveis, different standards. Let me take the part that's not muksher, so there's no issue. Anyways, you would eat even if it was you take that part. So first of all, if they were to do that, we have to just quickly repeat two ways of looking at a division of a Yerusha. Prior to the division, it's called tfisas habayis or tfusas habayis, but it's considered owned jointly. But when they divided, if you subscribe to the principle of Bereira, retroactive clarification, then we were to interpret that always belonged to you. And it's important to use the principle of Bereira. Why? Why do we need Bereira here? Why do we have to say that from the outset, the son, the chaver, got the non-muksher, and the other son got, why do I care? I'll tell you why we care. Because our Mishnah, this Mishnah that we're quoting, is following the Shita that holds that in Eretz Yisrael, it's asur to be metamei chulin, that's tahar. Number two, based on that isur, lifnei iver loisiten michshel, don't sell to a am haaretz food that's tahar. Now guys, here we're going to play both sides of the coin l'chumra. Mitzad echad, we're saying, we don't know whether the mukshered wheat became tummy. We don't know that. We're saying that, it's for sure tummy because it belonged to am haaretz. We're saying we don't know that for sure. You got to assume, you got to behave as if maybe it's not tummy yet. And if now you're going to give it to the am haaretz, maybe now he'll be metameh it. So if I'm a chaver and I own mukshered wheat, Look at what we're telling me. On one hand, I can't eat it. Why can't I eat it if it previously belonged to am haaretz? Because maybe it became tummy. On the other hand, I may not sell it to an am haaretz because maybe it was not tummy yet, and it will become tummy sooner or later under the possession of the am haaretz. If you don't subscribe to Bereira, if every piece of wheat belonged to both brothers, and now when they're making a division, it's as if you're selling me your part, I'm selling you my part. Some of it is mukshard, so I'm selling you mukshard grain. I can't do that. Lifnei iver leisitin michshel, on this rabbinic law. If you subscribe to Bereira, then I can say I'm not selling you anything. I'm going to take all the wheat that was never mukshard. You're going to take all of the wheat, you the am haaretz, the other one, mukshard. And it was always yours. I'm not selling anything. So since we subscribe to Bereira, I am allowed to make that division, but if we're speaking about wheat, again, some of it, if all of it was muksher, there's no point of doing it. You have to get all these steps. Again, we're going both sides of the coin. On one hand, we're saying if it's muksher, it's tamei. Then we're saying the opposite. If it's muksher, it may not yet be tamei, and if I'm going to give it now to the am haaretz, he'll be metamei. But if it's wheat and anything else, we can't. There's no Bereira there. Even though they have the same value. You know, dad left apples and wheat. You take the apples, I'll take the wheat, just for example. what we say is that prior to the division, the brothers owned the wheat and they owned the apples. And if one will only get one item type and the other will get the other item type, it's viewed as an exchange sale and that won't be permitted. Now let's read it inside. The father was an Ama'aretz. So the Chavet is allowed to tell his brother the Ama'aretz if they are only discussing the division of wheat. And Chaver, again, what happened here is that we know, the Chaver's son knows that some of the wheat was not mukshed. Because if the wheat is mukshed, there's no point, it's all tamei. Makom ploini means I know that the wheat over there got wet, or I'm chayish that it got wet. And vani chitim b'makom ploini. And again, the only reason why we allow this to happen is because we subscribe to the principle of Breda. Because if you don't use the principle of Breda, then this is called a bona fide exchange, barter, sale. And again, even though we're speaking about already mukshed, tamei wheat, we still say maybe it's not tamei yet. And now that you are giving it to the Ama'aretz, he will be matamei it, all based on the principle that it's asur to be matamei chulin in Eretz Yisrael. However, if you, same thing also, you are allowed to do it because we are dividing the same item type, the same type of item. All that is because of Breda. The father left liquids and solids. Just an example, wine and wheat. I can't tell the brother, even though it has the same value, this is worth 100, that's worth 100. You know what? You're going to take the liquids. And that's perfect because liquids, my friends, are already mukshed. You get it? So you take the liquids, and I'm going to take the yavesh. Again, he knows that this yavesh was not mukshed yet. So if you view this as a Breda type of division, Shalom al Yisrael, you can't do that. You can't do that because, like we mentioned,
what is the reason? What is the logic?
The logic is because we view when the father passes away that, like real estate and real estate, father left two houses, and Reuven says, I'll take that house, you'll take that house. It's as if they lechatchila got that house directly from the father. But if the father left different items, then we view like karka and metaltalin. All of the brothers own the karka, they all own the metaltalin. If they choose later, you take the metaltalin, I'll take the karka, it's considered an exchange. You can't use Breda even if you subscribe to the principle of Breda. An exchange is a sale. And you have to just be aware of this din that the Chachamim said you're not allowed to sell chulin to Ama'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. And if you do so, Rashi says you're violating lifnei ivr. They are using the lifnei ivr, which is a biblical concept, to a rabbinic rule, which not everyone even agreed to.
And you don't even know if it's tummy.
And you don't. If I cared, not only you don't know if it's tummy, it could be it's tummy already. It could be it's tummy. Why don't you want it? Because it might be tummy. If it's tummy, then there's no problem anyways. That's how careful they were. Now, 1 second, we're not done yet.
What do they do with that? What does the chaver do with it?
Oh, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. Okay, again, there's nothing wrong for me to own chulin that's tamei. I know that we learned this in other sugyas. There is a rabbinic tumah that happens to the person that consumes chulin that's tamei. He becomes tamei midrabanan. If I don't want to even get there, then I'll sell it. I can say one thing, that anything that's tamei has less financial value. Because since there were some people that only ate everything betara, so that's the rule of life. If I have a product that more people want to buy it, or that everyone can buy it, it has more value.
How do you sell it? That lifnei ivr.
I can sell it to a chaver. I'll find someone that's going to pay less money, Danny, because he's tamei anyway. If I'm tamei anyway, like I'm tamei to my mace, I'll eat chulin that's tamei. There's no iser to eat chulin that's tamei. Okay, now, Vitran Allah, we learned on a brayse that oisa chaver, the chashash, that something that belonged to Ama'aretz is so stark that when he gets now that liquid, we taka presume, right, even though we don't know for sure, that the liquid is tamei, and he burns soyref alach, which is a big statement. Soyref alach means, like we mentioned, not toilin. The chashash that since it belonged to Ama'aretz, the Ama'aretz was metamed is so high, it was already metamed, even though you can't sell it, because we also say maybe not, but the maybe yes is so strong that he has to burn it.
And he sells it what?
Yeah, that's fine. No, not truma. This is truma. 1 second. This is truma, right? Has to be, yeah, of course. But if it's truma, we're chayish so much that you burn the lach, but you can leave the yavish. Now hold on. Now we're coming all back over here. What was the question, guys? If you give wine to the chaver, shaloi b'shas hagitois, let the chaver keep it until shas hagitois, because you can take the wine of the last year. So it says all of that is a proof. It says the Gemara, why should he burn it? No, it's everything makes sense until this last line. Why should the chaver burn it? We speak lach also means wine. But don't limit it that it's not wine. And the Gemara has no option. The only way to say that this Braisa Taka doesn't prove that if it was already in the domain of the coin it must be burnt is by saying that this Braisa that says Lach is only speaking about items that don't have a pressing season. There are certain liquids that don't have a season, and then it's always going to be Midrabanan Tameh. They give an example, date beer. Date beer, for some reason, it doesn't have a certain season. You have to know how these things work. Hold on. And now, Chaver, we've said in the beginning, why are we learning about all this in Chagiga? All of this is a build-up for one important hook into Chagiga. That the Chachamim were lenient. During Yom Tif, they considered everyone to be Tahor. We'll learn about this soon. So now we got another problem. I get it, you can farenfer, connect it to our Mishnah, it doesn't have a pressing season. But why should the brother, he can't do the barter, so he's going to get some of the lach, and it's coming from his father, so and lach is already mukhshur v'oimid, so it's tameh and burn it, and the answer must be, because when do we lower the standard? Shaloi b'shas haregel. Shaloi b'shas haregel, now that you got it, it's too late. All this will be a raya. It's still not a proof. Because maybe the Braisa is speaking about the davar she'ein mishtamer l'regel. But maybe if it would stay fresh until the holiday, maybe you are allowed to keep it. And therefore, Chevra, this boya is not resolved. Gavaldik, let's go back to a few more lines. Going back to the Mishnah, what was another din in the Mishnah?
Didn't you say you could leave it over for them?
The Amaretz has to leave it over, but you are not allowed to accept it. And since you accepted it, maybe you, the chaver, maybe you erroneously will consume it before the pressing season. So maybe Chazal says if you received it, it's tummy.
You said you could keep it in your house.
No, I didn't say. I said the Amaretz can keep it in the Amaretz's house. Oh, now ve'im Amar, if the Amaretz gives a kohen a barrel of wine truma, not during the pressing season, but he tells the kohen, not all of this is yours. Not all of it is truma. It's 99%. You know, the chiddush is it's almost all truma, but one amount, even only at Revi'is, is kodesh. So the Mishnah says not only is he neman for the kodesh, it's migu. He neman for the kodesh. The whole barrel is okay. So now we're going to see. Let's see how far we can get. We're going to make a gavaldika link. So Tanan Hasim, let's begin learning halachas that we have in Masechtas Ahalois. Again, we're learning this in Ambam. We also had recently the whole din of a beis hapras. A beis hapras means that if there's an area in which there was a corpse buried, and we either don't know exactly where the corpse is buried, so when you walk in that area, you might be walking over the mace, tumas oil, or the kaved was plowed over. So even though there's no longer tumas oil, because for a corpse to give off tumas oil, there has to be minimum amounts. It has to be at least a kazayis min mace, not less, right? You have to have a roiva of atzamais, or roiv minyan, roiv binyan, or the shidra, or the gulgoilas. But etzem, if touch, is matama, right? Kisoira. So Tanan Hasam, that moidim beishamai ubeisilel, that if you have such a field and rabbinically it's considered tamei. But what is the chashash, my friends? That there might be a fragment of a bone on top of the field. You might touch the fragment of the bone, and there is a certain way you can circumvent that. How is that? By making a bedika. What will be the bedika? One of the two. Either you have this instrument that blows with koyach the ground upon which you're going to trample. So the fear is that you're going to touch a fragment of the bone. If the area is, today you have these blowers that make noise and make you meshuga, so have a blower and walk over there. Another way of being boidik is that if many people trampled on that area prior to you coming, however you define that, even if there was a fragment, it went into the ground. It was trampled upon. So can you rely on that? So they both agree that if I'm rushing to make a carbon pesach, and I'm coming the last second, look at the scenario, what's the cutoff time, chevre? Shkia. Not eating, shechting it. I am going towards the Beis HaMikdash. There is the shortcut that would get me there before Shkia is through a Beis HaPras. I can walk around it, I'm going to get there too late. Pesach is a positive commandment that's time-bound. I don't have the luxury of doing it tomorrow. It has to be done at Erev Pesach. So for that, Shaboitkim lo Oisei Pesach. You can make this examination. Blowing it, see if it's trampled, but that's only if you're going to do a Pesach. But the Ein Boitkim lo Oichlei Truma. If I'm rushing to eat, guys, eating Truma for a Kohen, where's is a mitzvah. But you don't have to eat Truma today, you can eat Truma tomorrow. So what happens if a Kohen knows there's Truma over there? So he's going there. But to get there, he has to walk either through a Beis HaPras or around it. We don't allow for him to use these mechanisms to say, I'm going to blow the ground. You can't do that. Why? It's a mitzvah, not about a mitzvah. You don't have to eat it today. It's not time-bound. Now, how do you make the bedika? So here we have the two things that we mentioned. The bedika would mean when you are allowed to do it. You can blow the ground. So even if there's a bone fragment, you won't step on it. And number two, if it was really trampled prior to you coming here, tahar lo oisei Pesach. Okay? Tahar. Now, just to know, bidika means, what is it? Bidika means you will examine it to see if it was properly trampled. Now, what do we see over here? Lo oisei Pesach, lo yemidu devrei memakom kares. If you're going to do a Pesach, if you'll miss the Pesach, what's going to happen? You're going to get Kaddish. You know, there's two positive commandments for which not doing the positive brings Kaddish. So the Chachamim were the ones that said you got to be chayish to a Beis HaPras. But the Chachamim didn't insist when it comes to a possibility of the violation of a Kaddish. But even though, guys, you see, if you eat Truma bit Tuma, you're chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. So don't do that. Now, what is that connected to our Mishnah? Now here we go. So they asked in the yeshiva when they learned the sugya, what happens if someone is running, a kohen is running to make a carbon pesach, and he's allowed Saila b'shamai, Saila b'silol to blow on the ground in front of him, and he was badak lepischai, and he came to the other side, and he's considered tahar for the pesach. Ma'u sheyoichal b'trumasai. Even though if he only would have been going to eat truma, if he would have walked through this Beis HaPras, even making the bedika, we wouldn't rely on it. So Ula Amar says Ula badak lepischai mutalachal betrumasai. If he did it because he had a heter for the Pesach, he can rely on it for the truma. Rabba Bar Ula says no. Badak lepischai, he can eat a Pesach, but also lechal betrumasai.
Is that his son?
So now, Amaleahu Sava. Normally, Sava means Eliyah Navi. Eliyah Navi came to Rabba Barula and he tells him, Leisiflaik alei de'ula. So Shuki is asking if it's his son. Maybe if it would have been a son, he would have said, Leisiflaik alei the Abba, the Avucha. Maybe it's someone else.
Maybe it's because his father is disrespectful.
I don't think so. Because the proof of this Sava is from our Mishnah. Now you get the link. Because we learned like in our Mishnah, like him. What does it say in our Mishnah? That Neman, even though Neman doesn't only mean that you can use that Revi'is for Kachim. Neman means the ganze barrel is Tahar. The Kohen can consume the rest of the barrel. Alma, that mid the mehemen HaKodesh, mehemen ami atruma. So hachinami, mid the mehemen HaPesach, mehemen ami atruma. Gewaldig. Chevre, Agit Chodesh to be continued. 2 more daf to go.
So basically